please. Look at that. She was just ready. Didn't even need the prompt from me. Look at that. So welcome, everybody. A special thanks to James to come and share with us for this session of the Child Theology movement of our network as we seek to gain wisdom and insight and inspiration and encouragement from around the world around child theology. And it's our immense privilege for James to come and share with us on a life's journey. So I don't know, 30 minutes, a life's journey in 30 minutes, James. So we're really blessed. So please do take your 30 minutes and lead us in any discussion that you would like to of child theology in the midst of my life's journey. We thank you for coming to share and welcome to our meeting. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the invitation. I feel like it's an honor. And I think you guys have a lot of courage to invite me, but I appreciate it. I am coming from more of a practical perspective. I'm a missionary 26 years in Brazil. We work with a lot of child educators and programs in Brazil. I guess that's pretty much my introduction. It's great to see you, John and Keith, and some of you others. And I'd like to start with an invitation. I would like to invite you to accompany me on a little journey where I hope, if you haven't already, you will encounter the child in our midst. This journey started some 26 years ago. I found myself in a dark place in life. Brazil, once mysterious, overflowing with beauty and laughter, had lost all color. Its romantic language of those great ocean navigators, once beautiful to my ears, was complicated as the jungle. My wife and I had been ministering for about 5 years. We had been invited by a local church. Together with my sister-in-law, we strove to serve single mothers by providing children and teens with daycare and other school activities. The Brazilian school system provides children with 4 hours of school a day. These single mothers worked 8 hours. That means 4 hours the young children needed care. We had discovered in our town, 80,000 strong, hundreds of children ages 1 to 5 were still without daycare. Also, many children and teenagers needed after-school programs. It was the year 2004, and the ministry had grown in the last 5 years from 120 to over 320 children and teens. While important, these numbers are not as valuable as some of the changes in ministry. We had seen the child educators grow in different ways, which reflected in the lives of children. The mothers now had a voice and participated in the ministry. The children and teens had sponsors. They received letters and wrote them back. Yet our town, as mentioned, still had so much ministry to be done for children at risk. So we presented our plans and asked the board members, look what has been done these last 5 years. We've almost tripled. Let's grow some more. We can join forces with even more churches. Together we can carry a greater load. It seemed obvious to me we must grow. Their answer was no, no, no. Perhaps looking back, they were right. If the church and board is not ready, if they do not have the vision, then even the best plans will fail. Rarely do I or we like a no, especially when we want to grow. This, along with other difficulties, led me into a dark jungle. Worry not, fellow travelers. All rivers have many tributaries. To learn ever so slowly that seeds take longer to sprout than we like to wait, and longer yet to reach their full height. You see, 4 years earlier, a seed had been planted by another wayfarer who came upon these great Brazilian shores. This one came from an island known for its great navies. He came as a medical doctor turned missionary, a heart filled with love for children at risk. John Collier, after taking early retirement as a doctor, you can correct me, John, if I'm off a little. He took early retirement as a doctor so he could minister to children at risk. Upon arriving, he gathered a group of evangelical organizations to start a magazine to help those working with children at risk. One key player was a national evangelical magazine, Ultimato. As fortune would have it, the church we were in was started by the same pastor, Albin Caesar, who started the national magazine. This pastor's wife, Donna Deja, was instrumental in getting my wife, Elsie, a Brazilian with a master's degree in journalism, to be the editor. Meanwhile, through meetings and friendship, John invited me to go to Houston for a child theology consultation. Let it be known that child theology does not do conferences, but consultations, and for good reasons. So off I went, not knowing what I was getting myself into, really. At this consultation, I met Keith White and Jerome Berryman and many other wonderful people. I was fortunate to participate in the Good Shepherd lesson of godly play presented by none other than Jerome Berryman himself. Seriously, it was heart moving and I loved it. There and then, in the middle of my life, in a dark jungle, I had been properly introduced to the idea of the child in our midst. Quite frankly, it was a bit awkward. It went against a lot of my culture and experience. I had done 2 years of Bible school and had never met the child in the midst. I had gone to the city of brotherly love, studied theology and missions under Dr. Samuel Escobar, Dr. Ronald Sider, and other wonderful scholars. Yet the child had never shown up. Thinking back now, I'm not sure if the child hadn't been sent an invitation or if the invitation was never received. In the city of brotherly love, I had learned a lot about the weak, the poor, the oppressed, about God's love for all, history, hermeneutics, and the like. Certainly, the titles children, teenagers, often lined up, statistics, and the percentages, but for some reason, I never was introduced to the child in the midst. I never even got a glimpse. Oh, certainly during discussions of theology, the child was mentioned, but I never once caught a glimpse of the child in our midst. Perhaps we must confess that with all the other many important and great questions in the debates about God and his kingdom, the child was so easily overlooked. Or perhaps the child was there and my eyesight was just too weak to see. I have a question to you, fellow travelers. Why did I not see the child sooner? I'm sure I had read or heard this story maybe 20 or more times. Could it be that the story is just about the adults? Perhaps the child is just a prop, a very clever teacher's aid. The child of child theology first appears to you, or so it happened to me, with me during a consultation reflecting upon Matthew 18, 1 through 5. Jesus, rather his spirit, puts the child in our midst. And being confronted by the child, I started to see the child Jesus put in my midst. After doing a few more child consultations, and mind you, never one was a conference, I can say that it is truly an amazing insight of child theology that this was a theological debate. And Jesus placed the child right in the middle. The child appeared. Not magically, of course, but by Jesus choosing and placing him in the midst at his side. So, in a real sense, the child I was introduced to became my guide, helping me through the dark jungle. I'm sure if you let them, they'll gladly be yours too. These are some of the things the child in the midst has taught me while reading scripture and ministering. First, I learned to pay attention to the child in scriptures. Seriously pay attention. Not the child as category or an age group. Not as a story prop, but the child as having a part, a real participant in the scriptures. Okay, I got a warning here not to do this outside of the scriptures, what I'm going to say. We are properly taught not to compare one another. Well, yes, it's polite and should be obeyed, but as I learned, comparing the child in scripture makes for some great interpretive readings. As I did Bible studies for our network, I constantly compared the child with adults. For instance, it is so fun to compare a girl with a king. The one without power, resources, titles, a foreigner, a slave, or servant, she knew how to advise Naaman, the notorious general. She simply said what needed to be said. She told him, "Go see the prophet in Samaria. He will heal you of your leprosy." This general, named Naaman, received her advice, which raises some interesting questions, but you can wonder why he might have done that on your own. And as any good, powerful adult would do in entering another country, he goes to Israel and visits the king to find out where this prophet might be. The king, ruler of the land, having resources, titles, influence, and education, in other words, a lot of power, knew not what to say or how to help the adult. All he could do was get angry and tear his clothes. How ironic is that? In my experience, we tend to discuss the dirty river and how he washed in it, Naaman washed. The corrupt servant who asks for money. None of these would have happened without the slave girl speaking out of her gracious faith, perhaps even out of her courage. The child contributed despite her lack of resources and position. She was more than a prop, more than a fill-in character. She was a key actor. I find that consistently comparing the child in the biblical stories with adults reveals powerful insights to both God and his kingdom. The reading of the scriptures with the child in my midst has revealed meaningful and applicable insights. The child contributes in God's kingdom despite their lack of power. Or is it that their lack of having power allows them to contribute? I'm not sure. My second growing point came through the magazine Maus Dadas, the one John had instigated or started, and this magazine this magazine needs photos of Brazilian children. It's about Brazilians, real Brazilian children in their everyday lives. One thing I learned in photography was that the perspective of the camera communicates meaning. Simply put, if you face the camera top down, is telling the viewer that they are superior to the subject. And bottom up says the subject is superior. Like when you look up at rock stars and important people on a stage. Oops, put me there. The child in my midst instructed me that children were no lesser, but were at least equals, if not superior, in the kingdom of God. It was not much to see that almost all my photos needed to be at eye level with the child. And I would like to share some of these photos. I think this one here with you now. That didn't go, did it? Is that right?
We can see that, James. Yep.
Okay. So this is from my project. These are my greeters for you. I think one of the things I always try to do in our photos that we just get, the child is normally active. They are doing stuff, they're participating, and usually, almost always, they're never alone. That's more like a safety protection, I think you guys recognize. These are photos from our partners. Now, this boy is alone up in the Amazon, but he's quite brave. That was a huge rainstorm. He had just paddled around on the river Elias. This is the same city. His spot up in the upper right hand is his father's hand in there. And this one it's perfect alone. When I get eye level with them, I often receive a gift. The gift in this case has been the photos it gave me time and again. These gifts have overflowed into campaigns, expositions, educational materials, and blessings to many Christian workers, other children, and adults. Thirdly, one thing you need to know that the magazine became a network of organizations. In this network, presently we have 66 partners with many hundreds of projects and programs around Brazil. The photos we need come from our partners, which takes me to favelas, back to the real jungle, and to many different regions of Brazil. All of them are hot. Some wet and hot, others dry and hot. Brazil is large, so I get to travel long distances, sometimes in bouncy buses, wooden boats. When I get there, I stand, squat, and kneel an awful lot. But I never did have to run, thankfully. Sometimes I go with a group of short-term missionaries working 12 or more hours a day. These are the most exhausting. All this to say, sometimes, that taking photos can be very tiring, even exhausting. What the child in my midst has taught me is that they can contribute, right? that they are equals in the kingdom, if not superiors. I might have been there to help them, help the ministry which serves them. What child theology taught the child, or said the child taught me. If I let them, they always gave me more than a beautiful photo. Their joy for life, their interest in who I was, my accent, the camera. They even wanted to know if I was a friend of Justin Bieber. If I was open, drop my adult need to be in control, to be there to save them, protect them, make sure everything was all right, and receive their curious smile. There's sometimes silly, sometimes insightful questions. Their energy for life, I actually got something beyond another nice photo. Despite the hot, difficult surroundings, the child's presence gave me a sense of peace, sometimes rest and joy. A sense that God's Spirit was telling me just relax. Go in peace, James. Part of our ministry with the Christian educators is to help prevent burnout. I often see us adults so busy trying to save, teach, control the child for the child's own good. And yes, the scriptures allow for this, even require this. But we adults get stressed, burned out because there's so much need. I wonder, actually, I see and hear the adults' responsibilities getting in the way of allowing the child to contribute. It becomes a one-way street. Being able to receive some peace, some rest, a smile becomes a way of sharing the yoke. The children are there offering their joy, their curiosity for life, despite all their difficulties and all the things they lack. I wonder, how often do we miss and ignore what they have to offer? Jesus promises that his yoke is light. If it isn't, maybe you're missing something he sent you. That's what I think today. I hope, if you haven't already, you are starting to see the child in our midst, that Jesus puts them in our lives not as huge responsibilities, but as co-participants in his kingdom. Perhaps they are even more than that. So, every good journey, if it is worth telling, needs to have some rough roads, no? Little bit of struggle, even a bit of danger. So this is not going to be like jumping into the Amazon River, I promise. So please come along with me a little bit more. I'd like to challenge the idea that the disciples were having a theological debate. I would like to say that perhaps this reading, however beautiful, and I mean beautiful in the old sense, the sense of good, right, and attractive, is a little too modern. It seems to me it follows the modern division of public and private life, the division of religion, therefore theology as private and personal. Thus, reading the scriptures, whether in the church, Sunday school, personal devotions, is a personal, private matter, but not public. On the other side of this division is politics, the public, politics, economics, governing. These are public affairs. They're about control, influence, the use of communal power. It seems to me that when the disciples were debating who would be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, they were not thinking in terms of our personal private lives. They were thinking and rightly discussing about influence, power, maybe even nationalism. This was more than a theological discussion, but it was also not less than a theological discussion. I'd quickly like to say that yes, this conversation does have theological implications, but it seems to me their question was about public power, influence, position, and rulership. In the context of this question, briefly, Matthew and Luke place the transfiguration, where the disciples, before the disciples have this argument, certainly was still on their minds the transfiguration with Moses and Elijah, both public figures. Right after Jesus expelled a demon, and the people being amazed were amazed at the majesty of God. Might some of the disciples figure that Moses or Elijah might be the greatest in the kingdom? Perhaps they were even thinking of themselves or one of the three that went with Jesus to the mountain. Jesus, being Christ the King, who would be at his right hand? The theological implications are many, but the question still stands as a question for me of who will be the most powerful in the kingdom of God. To answer this question, as I have in others, as only a theological debate, seems to miss the public dimensions of power, influence, and rulership. It was Jesus, the Lord of Lords, King of Kings, the one who would send those disciples to all the nations, who put a child in the midst of the disciples' question on who would be the most influential and powerful in the kingdom of God. I think that we can end this short journey together by saying that Jesus put a child in the midst of our world, an adult world, which has been torn apart by powers that aren't humble, that do not serve the needy, the weak, the oppressed, but rather certain powerful adults and their kingdoms. The child seems to me to be a powerful sign that the kingdom of heaven is completely different than the kingdoms of adults. And that, for me, is truly good news. And that is where I am at today. I think that's so my hand is raised. How do I unraise this?
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
There you go. That's fine. James, thank you so much for taking us on that journey, even a pilgrimage with you through your journey, and that's been a real honour for us to be able to tag along that and to bring those insights. I, for one, had no idea where you were going to take us tonight, and that's just been a real joy to my spirits to journey that. So thank you very much. So I just want to open it up for people now. I'm hoping I can't see everybody, so hopefully between the trustees we'll be able to see hands as they come up. So please, let's have a discussion together for a little while. Arrange any questions, any comments. Then please do. I'm sure James will be only too pleased to clarify anything and just explain any more. So anybody want to make any comments or make any questions? scrolling my screen. I'm hoping any movement, people's hands will come up on the top of my screen, but we'll see. I saw Haddon went to get a book halfway through your talk. I think he was certainly inspired by something. So, John, James mentioned you earlier on. Did you want to? I can't see you on my screen yet. Did you want to come back and comment on anything? Oh, Haddon, you've unmuted.
I'm struggling with the interface, that's all. So it's
Okay.
nice to see you all. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
It's nice to see you all. And thank you, James. I remember meeting you. And it was quite a well. It wasn't what I expected to be doing when I went to Brazil, but I think it's just that God had a plan, and um, and He brought us together, and with Elsie too, we were able to start something happening. There we go. It was a surprise. It was about being available to what God was doing, I think. And yeah, I don't think I've got a lot to say.
Well, I think you're being very humble there. You spend a lot of time and energy and work hunting down, driving over our wonderful roads with quebramolas. And I think it's a lot of people have been affected and participated in that start. Yes. My wife is here, Elsie. You want to wave? She showed up, helped me out, saved me maybe from my falls and whatnot.
I have a question.
Hi.
What difference does it make for you, James, that the disciples were asking about kingdoms and powers and not about themselves?
Thank you, Elsie.
What difference does it that they weren't asking about? They might have been asking for themselves. I don't think they really specifically say they were arguing amongst themselves. I've thought about this a lot. And I think that, they might have been, I used to think they were just arguing about themselves. And I said, wait, context, there's a lot of stuff here that they might have been arguing. Is Moses going to be, you'd normally think Jesus, who's going to be his right hand, Elijah, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know, but I do think it's
Are you saying that they were Christian nationalists?
No. Well, no, they weren't Christian at that time for sure. I think they were Jewish nationalists. And pretty much in the context, I do think that they did. I think it's pretty common thought that they were interested in throwing off the Roman Empire and getting the temple cleaned out. So I do think that there was definitely that was probably in some of their minds that some of them were considered zealots, and that has definitely political implications. I just feel that, like in my own life, I grew up in the system of separation of church and state. And so religion is for your personal life and that and values and stuff like that, which it is. But I think it's much more. I don't, anyways, I don't know. Did that answer?
Yeah, but so when Jesus, so let's suppose that he did that, that they had this intention of a more politic view. When Jesus answers with the child in the midst, what is that answer all about? What is he saying then?
That's a great question. And I think it's pretty amazing because it's just the opposite of our politics. I mean, a child comes, I mean, well, the greatest was a humble child, as I understand it. That was the greatest. But to even get into the kingdom, you had to be a child. So if the child, I mean, the child, it, doesn't come with all those power moves and all the knowledge and all those resources of what all that power that adults have and all the ways of manipulating and connections and all that. I think of the servants, something more along that line.
Thank you, Elsie, for keeping your husband honest. That's very good. I recognise that dynamic. Yeah, that's, thank you. I'm so glad you could come and join us. You were mentioned by Keith earlier, so I'm glad you could come and join us. So, Haddon, did I just see you come off speaker to share something?
Well, yes, I have great difficulties about all this. I don't. There's certainly no question of separation of church and state being read into the text or into the theology. It seems to me, Jesus is actually, I think, talking about God's action in the world. And the thing is that we're all little creatures, children and adults. I don't like treating children as in themselves as children distinctly close to the kingdom or not. I think it's evident that's not the case. And they're growing up to be adults. Oh, sorry, I'm being interrupted. I must break off.
Can I just say while that's happening, that I was wanting to make the link with Haddon for, just to say the way that James and ULC were talking just took me back to those times when we used to chat. And that's why I was asking Elsie, where are you? Because I couldn't imagine James without you. But to say that fed in you, I love the way James has talked of child theology being about consultations and not conferences, because it has been conversations and circles. So the way we've done it, quite apart from content, the way it's been done has been significant. And your conversations, Elsie and James, fed in to the book that Haddon and I wrote, which was a 12-year conversation. So the sun had set many times. And it was only our wives that actually brought the book to a close. I mean, eventually Hilary said, I'm not going to feed you or anything until you finally decide to call this a day. So I just want to say something about the process. Yeah, but I'm conscious that I know Haddon very well, and knew he would be having difficulty digesting some of the things being said, the questions being asked, and so on. separation of church and state, and this question of theology being private and politics and economics being in some way public. And I know the public theology is Haddon and I are both very much committed to. So whatever is going on in theology is challenging. I mean, it's completely embedded. All theology is contextual, and all theology is, in that sense, political and about power. Just one thing about, I thought, Elsie, you were asking, what were the disciples asking about the kingdom of heaven or kingdom rather than themselves as followers of Jesus? I thought that might be what you were asking. And that's a really interesting question, because Jesus does single out, certainly Peter at one stage, doesn't he? And say, do you love me? And he was one of those, obviously, on the Mount of Transfiguration, and also when the child was placed in the midst. Haddon, I was just really trying to, in some sense, connect and fill in. But I love the notion that child theology involves a way of doing things, and the way Jesus called and placed a child in the midst is quite, I mean, that seems to me quite unique, and we need to pay attention to this. This isn't a parable. The child isn't a prop. There's something going on. The one clue Jesus gives us is that we have to become humble as the little children, but also to then the practical challenge, which it seems to me this is where theology and power and politics and everything come together, to welcome a little child in his name is to welcome Jesus, and if you put the other synoptics together, and the Father. So there is something embracing, for you are Christ and Christ is God's, and so on. Haddon, that's where I was at, but I'm certainly challenged by the separation of theology as private and politics and economics as in some way public. Did you want to carry on, Haddon?
Can I want to definitely hear Haddon, because I respect him very much. But I think that I understand at that time what we would call the spiritual religion and politics were much more intermixed, and they walked together. Religion had, if you were a king or whatever, you had to have religion legitimizing. It didn't make sense to have the separation that we have. And of course, we have it for some actual, basically good reasons of problems of mixing and abuses and stuff like that. And I actually understand, I realize that this is a real problem. Elsie, you mentioned nationalism. And I feel like in my country, we've got some serious problems in this area. And I feel like the child does actually kind of answer that, or what Jesus did, and saying, look, God's kingdom is totally different. But that's
Great.
uh,
Thanks, James. If Haddon's back, if he wants to just finish his thought, you're just on mute still, Haddon.
Oh, I think, but
Thank you.
I do think the way, I don't want to approach the question of whether this text is in any way political or not by importing our categories. I want to go right back to the basics of the story. And what you've got is Jesus, God living humanly, dealing with other human beings. And these human beings, whether or not they had some interest in the politics of the day or not. It doesn't enter into the story. But what they do have is something very basic, and that is a kind of this competitive quest. Who is the greatest? This self-consciousness, that they're insecure in relation to other people, and therefore they're worried about their relative position and they have to do something about it. And this is very basic. This is, if you like, this is pre-political. Now then it plays out in politics, and you get Trump and you get Putin and you get all these people who are playing the game of being greatest. But that's not where it starts, and that's not where Jesus starts. And Jesus, therefore, is, I think, telling us something that is much more universal and everyday about human beings, and human beings in whatever context we find ourselves. And it may be in the family, or it may be in, or it may be in what we call politics or business or whatever. This insecurity, this passion to be great and so on, and Jesus answers it by putting a child in the midst. And that's not using child as a prop, but it's actually pointing to another human being, to a kind of way of being human, which is very different from what the disciples are after, what they think they're after. And in that sense, it opens up the question, and it asks them to change. It asks them to turn around and think differently, radically. And I don't think, I think I may have misheard Miss James, but I don't think Jesus said you've got to yes, that you've got to become children to be in the kingdom of God. You've got to become humble as a child. That's a different thing. I mean, an adult cannot become a child, and an adult shouldn't want to become a child, I think. I think we should recognize that the humanity that God has given us is a humanity that starts as a child and inevitably, unless we're cut short, grows up. And adulthood is a gift of God. Adulthood is the service of God. And that's why it's quite wrong for adults to abdicate their responsibility and hand over to children and ask them to run the church or run politics or anything like that. That's just abuse. It's stupid. So Jesus is talking to adults, and he's talking about them, and he's saying to these people who want to be great, and who therefore also, when they look upon the child, they think, that's somebody of a lower status. That's somebody negligible, marginal. Like you look at the poor and you think that too. And Jesus puts that human being in the middle and says, unless you become like this, and it's precisely the thing you don't want to become because you're after being great. And so it makes you think, but you can't become a child. You've got to find your own adult way of dealing with this problem of the restlessness of grace, of wanting to be great. And of course, you do it by receiving others. You do it by engaging. Now, if you can tell me how we human beings can receive other people without developing politics, it's not a question of our entering politics as though it's ready-made. We human beings become political beings, and we create politics. We make politics by living together, by receiving one another. And you've got a simple choice. When you're living with other people, you can either have war or you can have politics. Nothing else. You either find ways of ordering your life together so that you live together in a good, positive, fruitful way, a bit like the kingdom of God, or you tear each other apart, as Paul says in Galatians 5. If you turn on each other, you either have war or politics, and that comes from. It starts in the family. You know, a young couple want to get on with their lives and enjoy their adulthood, and suddenly they've got a child, and their life is transformed. But they've not simply got to care for a child or love this beautiful little creature. They've actually got to create a little political system for people living together and solving the problems of life together and not tearing each other apart. It's all political. Sorry, I'm...
That's fine. Thank you, Haddon. James, do you want to come back and anything before we open it up? And just to give a warning, if some of the trustees can perhaps read out any comments, if anybody wants to do that for us, that would be really helpful. Thank you. James.
Yes, in general, I agreed totally with all of what Haddon said, and you mentioned some terrible figures, one from my country, that I feel like at this time we need to hear this story from Jesus. And if it's just, for me, if it's just about theology and one thing I tried to do throughout the paper was avoid that word politics.
Mhm.
I think they were talking more about power, which we would equate to politics, obviously, and so forth. And I feel like Jesus was just turning all our systems upside down right there and saying, wait, everything you'd want to do to be great in all these kingdoms, and there was all kinds of great people. Herod the Great, he had passed away. All the Caesars, they were great people. They were powerful people. And so what were the models for the disciples? And I think Jesus was saying, wait, you've got it all upside down. If we want a kingdom of peace and true politics, it's totally different than what what is normal, what goes on in this world of adults. Yes, we are all going to be adults. You're all going to continue to be adults. And I think it was, quite shocking. And probably they didn't understand it. And I think I'm still trying to understand it all, what Jesus was doing by putting that child in the midst. So I don't know if that clarified everything.
Well, that's a part of the discussion. We live with the mystery as well as the certainty. So that's fine. Great. Is anybody from the trustees read out any comments that would be helpful to hear at this stage? I can't get my screen to do everything, otherwise I'll just lose you all. No? No. I can see some of the trustees just looking at me, so no.
Sorry, Paul, I've been looking through, and I think the answer is there's nothing that relates to the discussion where we've got at the moment. There's information about a very good conference and papers for so on.
Fine. Okay. That's fine. I just saw something flash on the screen of somebody making a comment, and I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss it. Okay. Does anybody else want to share anything? Perhaps something very different to what we've discussed already that was particularly struck you or inspired you or resonated around the journey that James has taken us on? Sebastian, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
I want to ask a question. So, listening to Mr. James' story and journey, I realized that actually that story is also my story and many others' story because most of the time you can find and see people who are engaged in mission with children, uh, some of them for a long time, for years, yet without placing the child in the center or without a theological reflection about the child, basically just doing things for the child but not reflecting on the child as a theological um, activity. So I understand now that the proper course of things is actually no activities for children without theological reflection on children, and no theological reflection on children without activities directed towards them, because I think theology um, uh, becomes useless if we don't actually practice. We move to practical theology. So the perspective of the child in the midst, I think that it changes the way we should perceive mission. And my question is that how has this new perspective of the child in the midst reshaped the way you engage in mission among children? This is my question for Mr. James. And how should it reshape the practice of those involved in ministry with children, especially with marginalized children or children uh, in situations of risk?
Thanks, Sebastian. James?
Thank you. Maybe you're hitting it on one of the points that maybe had, and I think may have, I'm not sure. I'm just making a connection here that I many times throughout my journey, I've been learning that I think the Bible stories, they're not the main actors, except for maybe David and Goliath, right? But normally the child throughout the Bible is there contributing, they're participating. They've got all the spiritual qualities that we want, not that they're perfect, not but they have courage, they have faith, they give what they have, etc., etc. And yeah, we don't want them in politics and not Samuel needed Eli to tell him, no, go back, and when you hear this voice, you do this. He needed, Eli. They need the adults. But I think from my experience and what I've learned to do just in something as simple as photography is that the child is there. God uses a child and they can contribute. And if I don't receive, if I'm closed to that because I'm so busy not listening, taking care of or whatever, um, I I lose possibly a gift from God, a blessing from God that will help me in my ministry, helping them. And so I feel that that's one of the major things that I've learned is that, yes, they're children, they need to be protected and this and that, but they are co-participants. They can participate, they can contribute in many different ways. We don't expect that little slave girl to take Naaman all the way and find him and pay for his trip and all that. Obviously not. That's what adults needed to do. The king couldn't do that for some reason. He didn't, you know. So I think that is one of the major things. We see a lot of educators working with children's in favelas and places of difficulty, and there's a large turnover. Some of it isn't just, you know, burnout because of that. Sometimes it's because of low pay and so forth. And it's a major concern. And I sometimes see or wonder or see that it's sort of like the style of a teacher, not to cut teachers, but that you're teaching, you have to give them the information, you're always giving, and you're not receiving. And the child has some things to offer.
So basically, you're saying that we as educators or missionaries among children should not see the children just as passive recipients of our activities, but actually as participants in the kingdom of God and also in the mission of God, right?
Okay.
Okay.
We have a campaign for praying for children. So you have a lot of adults praying for children. We get over 50,000 people in Brazil and other to be prayed for children during this weekend and first weekend in June usually with Viva. And one of the most exciting and interesting things is one of our partners is one of the people or Elsie, I don't know, said let's have kids pray for kids. And they take a little video and these kids take it seriously. And we have children from Brazil praying for children in Mozambique, praying for children here in Brazil and the Northeast, et cetera, et cetera. Some other countries have gotten in from Spanish. And it's beautiful. And they're participating and they're praying for one another. It's and so what does that do in a child's health, in a child's growth and spirituality? I feel like, they're growing too. So,
All right. So this brings basically the transformation from marginalization to integration for the children, those children at risk and marginalized. Thank you.
yeah.
Great. Thank
you.
you both for that. Great. Anybody else like to make a comment or ask a question? We've got about 5 minutes left before we need to just.
Paul, it's Paul Butler. I can't get my raised hand.
Hi, Paul.
On that, continue to pursue that point. I completely agree with you, James, that we miss being blessed by how children live, how they respond, and so on. I just want to nuance it a little bit, say that's not unique to children. If I'm with a homeless person, I can fall into the trap of thinking it's entirely my duty to help and so on, and I can miss God's presence and speaking to me through that homeless person. So it applies to generically to the poor at least as well. So it absolutely happens with children, and we regularly miss it. But I think it can also apply to other marginalized groups.
Wow.
Can I respond?
Agree.
Say, oh, sorry, I can't put my hand up either. But I think right at the start of the process, I remember the first paper I did, which was looking at children in the Bible, and my dear friend Haddon wanted to just immediately say there's a risk of somehow placing children as distinct from or even as opposed to others rather than as a way of being human. And it seems to me that one of the things that has happened with liberation theology, feminist, womanist theology, and so on, is that we are beginning to find we have enriched insight as to who the players are, those who God is ordaining and choosing in His creation, those human beings. So not either or anything like that, a zero-sum debate, but just wanting to say with Paul Butler, that's right. I mean, it is now adding children to this who had so often been overlooked. That's always the thing, isn't it? How could we be so blind?
James?
I wanted to add one little tidbit to this. My parents were missionaries to the indigenous people in Brazil, and I can see that same dynamic of the missionary coming from a Western civilization to an indigenous group that is in a very technologically and economic inferior position, and the temptation to think that they don't have anything to add in spiritual terms. So we equate power to spirituality somehow. Since they don't have in this, they don't have in that either. And I think Jesus is saying, you're looking at it the wrong way. And to know that, God is not contained in our civilization, that there is his sovereignty and his power and his all knowingness enough for me to look at this indigenous group and say, where has he been operating here? What can I learn from them? And I think that's the posture at least James and I have been trying to emulate in working with children. How has God already revealed himself in this person's life? And how valuable is this person to God? And how can I switch this modus operandi that is so strong in me to want to fix their life? Because there's a lot of bad things happening here. But how can I learn from them?
Thank you, Elsie. James, is there anything you wanted to conclude? Our time is nearly up. Is there anything you'd like to say just to finish up with?
I hope I didn't give the idea that I'm for like children running governments or kingdoms. That's not anything at all absolutely contrary. But I'm definitely not for Christian nationalism. I think, unfortunately, today we almost have to say these things clearly. I don't know if it came across through telling you on my journey, but I work in other different things and stuff like that. But child theology, it's kind of interesting. I think from Houston, it's always been there somehow in my background, sometimes up front in my conscious, sometimes in the subconscious, and many of the dynamics. I think Sebastian, Keith always tried to get, and Haddon and John tried to always make the consultations have this connection. They used to fight practitioners and theologians and get them together and talk. And like you were right, it's very interesting dynamic. I mean, you're in a round table conversation with facilitators, but just getting that two perspectives was, I always thought, really exciting. And so a lot of things, I've been grateful to Child Theology and the chance to participate. And so I just have a thank you, and I hope I can contribute back.
Thank you,
Thank
James. Really do appreciate you sharing and taking us on that journey. I think it's been a really stimulating conversation, which is always a really good sign of wonderful content. And so thank you. And I always think it's a compliment to a speaker that it can be misunderstood, because I think people are then being provocative in what they're saying. So I think, I didn't particularly misunderstand it, I don't think, but so I think it's good. I thank you for the reminder of us not using children as props. I thank you for the starkness of that. And my takeaway is, I think I wrote this, your question down of, does a lack of power enable contribution? And I think that will sit with me for a while of how that looks. And so just thank you for taking us on that and sharing those beautiful photographs that we can journey with you in. So thank you very much. I think we've done the reminders for the 24th of November for our annual lecture. David, who was on the call, I'm not sure whether he's still here, is going to do a fascinating sharing in the new year of child theology and child development, which I think is going to be really stimulating on the 23rd of February. Corinne or anybody from the committee, is there anything we need anybody who's new to sign up to anything or send an email? Lucy Lou, is there anything we need people to do? Put anything in the chat if they want to be on any mailing lists or anything?
If you want to be added to a mailing list and you haven't been on a call before and added yourself, do pop it in the chat and I'll save that down and make sure that you get added.
Great, thanks, Corinne.
And we have a Child Theology Facebook group. So if you're on Facebook and not part of the Child Theology Facebook group, do join us there as well, because that's where we often post things as well.
Great, thank you very much. I feel I need to thank James and Elsie now. Yeah. I think it's just been enriched together. So thank you for bringing all those different perspectives and everybody who's contributed to the discussion. And yeah, we need to just let you go because our time is up. And yeah, our annual lecture is only 7-8 weeks away. So please come and join us for a stimulating time with Francis, which will be wonderful. There's a few emails going. So James and Elsie, thank you very much for coming to join us. And we look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.